YouTube test 1 2 1 2 3.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Hello, Carol. Councillor Kavanaugh, hello.
Hey, Sean.
Hope everyone had a lovely weekend.
Mhm.
We are now live on YouTube, Mr. Chair.
Bon matin tout le monde. Good morning, everyone.
Bonjour, Madame la Vérificatrice Générale. Nice to see you.
Pareillement.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Welcome to this Tuesday. Carol, do we appear to have quorum? I know we'll do roll call in a moment, but we feel good to start. Okay.
We do, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Merci. Well, good morning, everyone, and nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting conducted again by virtual meetings through Zoom. A reminder, keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. As usual, if at any point you want to speak, you should use the raise hand Zoom function. You'll find it in the Zoom controls at the bottom of the Zoom window near the audio controls. Our committee coordinator, Carol, and I will be watching for those cues, and the usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. Carol, I don't believe we had any public delegations signed up, and that is still correct. Is that, thank you.
That's correct.
Very well. We have no public delegations signed up for the agenda items. Members of the public are welcome to provide written comments, which will be circulated to members of council. I'll remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and will be archived to YouTube. So before we proceed, could we please do a formal roll call, please?
I'll say, Councillor El Shantari,
Present?
Councillor Darouz,
Here.
Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Here.
Vice Chair Meehan,
Here.
and President Cloutier.
Present.
You
Thank
have
you.
quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm happy everyone was able to join us today for this second Audit Committee meeting of the year. It's not a long agenda, but we do have some interesting items for consideration and important items. With the committee's concurrence, we'll start by hearing the consolidated financial statement of the city. On va commencer avec l'exposé sur les états financiers consolidés de la ville. This will include a presentation by Deputy Treasurer Ms. Jasmine, along with representatives from Ernst & Young. Then we'll consider the sinking fund financial statements and a new audit charter, and we'll finish with a presentation by the Auditor General, Nathalie Goujon, about the fraud and waste hotline. On va terminer avec une présentation de la vérificatrice générale, Madame Goujon, au sujet de la ligne des fraudes et d'abus. And so we'll now turn to the agenda. Any declarations of interest? Seeing and hearing none. Confirmation of minutes. The minutes number 11 from April 27th, along with the confidential minutes 11 from April 27th. Are those confirmed?
Carried. Confirm.
Thank you. Item number 1 has a presentation. And so item number 2, the sinking fund financial statements. Does anyone have any comment? There will be no presentation on that. Any questions?
Carried.
And so that
Can I-
item is,
Just one question.
sure. Is it, would you like to hold it, Councillor Kavanaugh, or is it very quick?
Well, I don't know how long it takes to answer a question, but I just wanted to check in about the sinking fund and how we're lining up with other municipalities
Okay.
in terms of
Well,
our fund.
then let's hold that item, and perhaps the Isabel, you're okay to hold that item, and you could provide answers.
Or I could answer now if you'd like. Mr.
Okay, go ahead.
So we don't really compare ourselves to other municipalities. What we make sure is that we're putting enough aside to cover our debt. And based on the financial statements, we're putting enough aside and we're ahead of where we need to be to cover our debt when the debt becomes due.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Thank you, Madam Deputy Treasurer. And so seeing no other comments or questions, is that item carried? Item number 2.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Item number 3, the Office of the Auditor General, the Audit Charter. And I appreciate the detailed communication that the Auditor General had with members of the committee with respect to her work on this and the Auditor General's bylaw and other documents that created the charter. Any questions, or can we carry that item?
Carried.
Seeing none, that item is carried.
Carried.
Thank you. And item number 4 is the report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline, and there is a presentation on that. And so we've held items number 1 and 4. Back to items number 1, we have a presentation from staff in financial services, as well as a presentation from Ernst & Young, and welcome Madame Gignac from Ernst & Young for your continuing work for the residents of the City of Ottawa with respect to auditing our financial statements. Isabel, I think it's you who is first, so ready when you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will present the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020. We also have Ernst & Young with us today, Susie Gignac, the partner responsible for this audit, and a senior audit manager, Mita Myers. They are here to present the audit results, the results of the audit after I've made my presentation. Oh, do you have that? Okay. Oh. So next slide, please. So we are reporting a surplus for the year ended December 31st, 2020 of 1.094 billion, which is different than the 17.6 million surplus reported at the end of 2020 for budget purposes. Financial statements are reported based on Canadian public sector accrual accounting standards, whereas the budget is reported on a modified cash basis. The surplus is higher on an accrual basis because it recognizes revenue that is not included on the cash or budget basis, such as assets contributed from developers and the share of earnings from hydro. And expenses include the annual depreciation of the historical cost of assets, which tends to be a lower cost than what is contributed to capital annually on a budget basis. In 2020, revenues increased by 247 million, primarily due to an increase in government transfers of 410 million, primarily for the Safe Restart program and other COVID-related funding. This increased revenue was partially offset by a decrease in fees and users charge revenues of 160 million due to lower transit fares and advertising revenue, as well as canceled programs and activities and recreation. Total expenses for 2020 remained consistent with 2019 levels. There were increased expenses related to COVID, as well as additional costs incurred by Ottawa Public Health. These cost increases were offset by decreases in costs related to facility closures, as well as other cost savings measures implemented by the city, such as discretionary spending reductions and staffing pause. Next slide. So the net debt is the difference between our financial assets and our total liabilities. Net debt at the end of 2020 was 2.37 billion, but this is offset by non-financial assets of 18.212 billion, which is primarily made up of tangible capital assets. The net book value of tangible capital assets increased by 953 million during 2020, and this reflects the increased investment in capital made by the city for projects such as Stage 2 LRT. The difference between net debt and non-financial assets is the accumulated surplus, which represents all of the accumulated surpluses of the city since its inception. Much of that balance is not in the form of cash, but in the form of capital infrastructure and reserves built up over by the city, built up over the years, and represents the amount available to service future generations. The city's overall accumulated surplus increased by 1.094 billion in 2020 to a total of 15.7 billion. Most of that increase is due to the annual surplus. Next slide. Accounts receivable increased primarily due to government funding for Stage 2 of LRT, as well as COVID-19 related funding. Investment in government business enterprise represents the net assets of Hydro Ottawa, which we report in our financial statements on an equity basis. The city received dividends from Hydro Ottawa in the amount of 23 billion in 2020, related to results from the 2019 operations. The loan receivable is a new line item on our financial statements. It is a Stage one LRT loan to RTG from long-term lenders that was assumed by the city in 2019. This amount was previously reported on a net basis and is offset by a liability to the long-term lenders for the same amount. Next slide. Accounts payable and accrued liabilities has increased by 46 million, primarily due to stage 2 of LRT, where services were received but not yet paid. Deferred revenue has increased by 183 million due to an increased collection of development charges, as well as government funding received in 2020 for COVID-19 and other social programs which had not all been spent in the year by the end of the year. The next slides will provide additional details on the next two major items, which is employee future benefits and pensions and the net long-term debt. Employee future benefits increased this year. These liabilities represent benefits earned but not payable until future years. The amount payable in the current year is budgeted for each year, and changes in future liabilities are primarily because of changes in actuarial assumptions and legislation. This future liability is an estimation and may or may not reflect the actual amounts that could be paid in the future. The most significant changes include post-retirement and post-employment benefits, which increased by 22 million, mainly due to an increase in long-term disability claims and post-retirement benefits. The City of Ottawa Superannuation Fund liability increased by 1 million, and these increases were offset by an $8 million reduction in the estimated future liability for WSIB. Next slide. Debt is only used to fund capital expenditures, which have a long life, to which we can match the term of the debt to the life of the asset. When you look at the debt level compared to the total cost of the city's gross assets, it represents 12.2% of those assets. Our net long-term debt increased, reflecting the issuance of a 300 million green bond for light rail. Principal and interest payments are restricted in two ways. Council has established specific targets for debt, whereby principal and interest payments for tax and rate supported debt are not to exceed a combined target of 8.5% of the city's own source revenue. In 2020, this percentage was 6%. The provincial measure looks at the cost of debt issued, including mortgages, as a percentage of own source revenues, and that limit is 25%. In 2020, this measure is calculated as 9.2%, which is far below the provincial limit. Compared to other large municipalities, Ottawa continues to have one of the lowest total debt per capita. The overall value of the assets based on cost increased by 1.221 billion in 2020. The most significant construction projects contributed to the increases are 417 million for the Confederation Line Stage 2, which is reported on in assets under construction, 214 million for roads infrastructure, and 371 million for water, wastewater infrastructure. As you can see from the chart, water and wastewater infrastructure makes up 29% of the total tangible capital asset net book value. LRT infrastructure is now showing as its own asset category in the financial statements and is made up of the LRT infrastructure assets such as tracks, tunnels, elevated guideways, platforms, bridges, signal system stations, and maintenance buildings. This concludes my presentation, and I will now pass it to Susie Gignac from EY for an overview of the audit results.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead then, Mr. Chair? Okay. All right, so thanks very much. We will walk through our audit results. Happy to answer any questions. Did you want to take, I see a question there. Did you want to take that question first, Mr. Chair, or have me start?
I can wait, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Shantiri, sure, let's have the audit results, and then we could ask questions to both staff and the auditors. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So maybe if we can move to the next slide, I'll walk you through the results, and then we're happy to answer any questions. I would say overall, the audit has been progressing as planned. I'm here today, as Isabel mentioned, with the senior manager who worked on the file with me, Mina Myers, and she will help walk through our presentation. Maybe I'll start. We're in a virtual world, and we've been doing the audit virtually for the second year, and things went very well. I make a big thank you to the city team for supporting us in that and leveraging the virtual tools that we have in order to complete the audit. So the audit is progressing as planned, and we expect to issue an unmodified opinion, which essentially will state that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with the public sector accounting standards. Our scope and plan is consistent with what we provided in November. We did identify some differences which have been corrected by management, as well as some uncorrected differences, which we will speak to in our presentation. We did take a combined approach, which means we relied on controls in some areas in order to reduce the amount of detailed testing that we did. And in particular, we relied on IT general controls and controls over the purchases, payables, and payroll system. We do have some open items, fairly common at this point in time. We don't actually sign off on the audit report until it gets presented to council. So we continue doing subsequent events and reviewing final working papers up until that date. We will get a letter of representation from management and perform and get updated legal letters. So if anything comes out of that work, we will certainly make sure the audit committee is made aware. So I'll turn it over to Mita to walk through our results at a high level.
Thank you, Susie. So on page 2 of our presentation, so if you can, yes, we presented here the highlights of our results of the audit procedures performed and organized by area of emphasis and or significant risk. So assuming that everyone read the results report, I'll just keep it brief and highlight a few points for each section. And at the end of the presentation, as Susie mentioned, we'll accept any questions that you might have details on. So for the revenue recognition, which involves main sources of revenue such as taxation, government transfers, development charges, contributed assets, and fees and user charges. Based on the procedures performed to date, the only difference that has remained uncorrected from the prior year was the incorrect recognition of the provincial gas tax revenue in 2019, which should have been recognized in 2020. This resulted in understatement of the 2020 revenue, and the net impact on the accumulated surplus was nil. For contingent liabilities and other payables, in addition to our detailed testing over accruals, we confirmed with in-house and external legal counsel to assess the completeness of contingent liabilities. This work is still ongoing, again, up to the date of the approval of the statements, which is our date of the auditor's report. So to date, there is a 17 million understatement of liability and expense related to the prior period, which resulted in the understatement of the current annual surplus. We're still monitoring the accruals to the date of the auditor's report. The next page, please. For the employee benefits, we engaged our internal specialists to help in assessment of the reasonableness of methods and assumptions used in the valuations. Other than the difference that is related to the past clarification of certain pre-existing plan provisions, which resulted in the net understatement of the 2020 annual surplus of 500,000, there were no other differences identified today. On page 4, for the tangible capital assets, TCAs, we reviewed significant agreements, which included LRT stage 1 and 2, and performed detailed testing on additions, any disposals, amortization, and related commitments and disclosures on the financial statements. We noted an overstatement of the TCA by 12.3 million, which is as a result of the delayed amortization on the related assets, which is the similar error that existed in the prior years and prior periods. And the net impact on the 2020 annual surplus is around 0.02 million. For the next page, please, on page 5, for net long-term debt, an item to highlight here is the presentation of the long-term receivable loan and the related long-term debt is now presented gross on the statement of financial position. Also, the related interest is presented on the statement of operations on a gross basis. This difference was prospectively corrected in line with the accounting standards. There were other prior period errors we reviewed with cities analysis of such corrected errors and related no disclosures, and they appear reasonable. On page 6 of our slide deck, throughout the audit, we have considered the impact of the COVID-19 and both inquired and conducted detailed testing work over accounts that were most significantly impacted by the pandemic. Based on the procedures performed to date, the financial statements as presented, the impact of the COVID-19 appear reasonable. On page 7, we again here we confirm, we say that no fraud risks were identified as a result of our procedures, other than the presumed risk of management override. At this time, I would like to inquire with members of the Audit Committee if you are aware of any fraud or suspected fraud or non-compliance with rules and regulations. Hearing none. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We cumulatively also presented here the impact of various differences, as I described, and the net impact on the financial statements. I would like to stress that we are still completing the review and our completion procedures to the date of the auditor's report, and we'll update you should anything significant arise. Thank you for this presentation, and now we would like to open if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jasmine, Ms. Gignac, and Ms. Myers. Thank you for your work. Just further to what Ms. Myers said a couple of moments ago, if any members of the Audit Committee or any members of Council, they are free to communicate with the audit team at Ernst & Young about whatever concerns they might have or observations that they might want to make that would impact the financial statement, and that is fraud or knowledge of fraud or any other items, and that is true for any member of Council. Councillor El Shantiri, you had a question, please, to either our finance team or the Ernst & Young team.
Well, I'll start with our staff, if I may. Question to Isabel, and I'm not sure if Carol can put slide number 6 back on, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Carol. Can you?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Carol. So the question, Ms. Jasmine, as you know, I'm always interested in, employment benefit and retirement, and if we always have enough funding been put aside for liability and unfunded liability. So if I understand correctly, there's a difference of $22 million between 2019 and 2020. Can you tell us why that number appeared? And because I don't think in the previous year was that much of a gap, unless my memory is not that great.
Mr. Chair, it is fairly consistent with previous years. The liability is continuing to increase. We also are making sure that we are maintaining a reserves balance to manage any of those future liabilities. As I mentioned in my presentation, each year we do budget the amount, the actual expense that's required in that year. And if we see that in those years, we'll need to start to slowly increase it, we would. But we do account for it annually as part of our budget. Most of the changes are due to actuarial changes. The discount rates would have decreased with some of the market returns, and so that had impacts on the overall liability.
And Ms. Jasmine, do we have the number between retirement and what do you call benefit or liability benefit? Like is the number like sustained between us and large cities like us, between, like I know that the retirement benefit is one thing, but also paying for injury and long-term disability is where we fit in that number?
I haven't done a comparison to other municipalities, but I know it is an issue for all municipalities in terms of the long-term liabilities. And several years ago, as you recall, they had brought on several presumptive cancer cases, and that in PTSD has also increased the overall liabilities.
And that's why I'm asking, because it seems what sitting on another organization in the province, we hear this translates to quite a bit of issue to some small municipality when this appears. So I just want to make sure we don't see that in our city, or we're not exempt. We're going to see it. We're going to see that increase year after year.
So this reflects the future, all the estimated future liabilities. So we are capturing it. We are making sure we have a reserve. And in our last reserve policy, we are trying to maintain between 9 and 12% of the overall liability as a reserve amount.
Okay, and my other question to you, Ms. Jasmine, is on slide number 7. The next slide, please, Carol. So thank you, Carol. So when we talk about the borrow, I think right now, are we at 9.2 in borrow percentage or 9.2? Is that the number we have right now?
So it depends on how you calculate the own source revenue. The province doesn't include all our revenues from development charges and gas tax. And so the number looks higher when you compare it to the provincial limit, but still very, very low compared to the 25% limit. When you look at how we calculate it, we include all those revenues, and it's actually 6% debt servicing.
Okay. Because in the past, our number was low, and when you read number 9.2, you find it is a little bit high, and so it's a different of reporting between the province and the city. Is that correct?
Yes, our policy is to keep it even lower than the 25%. We're at 8.5%. Even with our own calculation, it's a much lower number.
Okay, and my other question, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if Ms. Jasmine or the auditor is going to answer this. I don't mean our auditor, Ernst & Young team will answer that. And that's on page 6 of their report when they talk about investments and financial instruments. Is the auditor have seen this? Are they satisfied with it? Basically, are they satisfied with the the performance, the date, and accounting investment in financial instrument balance? Are they satisfied with this? Is that what I'm reading correctly?
So from our perspective, we're looking at how it's reported on the financial statements, and we're comfortable with how it's been reported. We don't look at the return on investments or anything to that effect. That would be part of management and council's responsibility.
And when you talk, and you heard me asking earlier about the employee benefit and cost, and you see, obviously you're supporting the city's position on it, or you're in agreement. Is that what I'm reading there?
We're in agreement with how it's been accounted for. So it's accounted for based on assumptions, based on the standards within public sector accounting standards. And we had our internal actuaries look at the assumptions being used, and we're comfortable with the amounts that have been recorded based on the plans that exist and the assumptions. So it's reported appropriately in the financial statements.
And just a question, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure who's going to pick on that, but should we increase the employee benefit and liability to where we don't have to go over that budget? Can we, there's a need to increase that? That's a question. I'm not sure if the auditor going to answer this or Ms. Jazz. I'm just looking for a way. If you're satisfied with the current practice, it's fine. But we hear time and time again, this number is not going to go down. Obviously it's going to be on the increase. Are we calculating, or are we budgeting enough for that item?
Isabel, I see that you wanted to answer. Sure, it might be more appropriate at Finance and Economic Development Committee, but Isabel, do you want to go ahead to?
No, we do include an amount every year. We look at where we think we're going to, what the trends over the past 5 years, when you look at the annual amount that we spend, and we are slowly increasing it each year and including it as part of our budget pressures.
Okay. That's all my question. Thank you for the indulgement, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Vice Chair Meehan, you had your hand up and it was down and now it's up again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize. My Wi-Fi is a bit weak here this morning, so I disappeared for a while. So I missed the end of Isabel's comments or her answers to Councillor El-Shantiri's questions. So I hope I am not repeating or I guess my first question will be, well, to anyone, I guess to Ernst & Young or city staff. I mean, given that the COVID causes a really special situation for the city, and the fact that we've got some fairly large lawsuits, I'm wondering if there's anything in the financial statements that are, you know, potential risks to the city, if there's anything that can be identified.
Those are contingent liabilities, and I don't know if it's
Would it be?
are you satisfied with how they were?
Yep. So, I mean, there are contingent liabilities within the city's financial statements, which are all of the legal claims. And if there's a likelihood that something will, if it's likely that there will be a payout, then those are recorded in the financial statements. So I think we're comfortable with the way it's been accounted for. That is one of the items that, as part of our subsequent events, gets updated, you know, up to the date of the audit report. And so we do have new legal letters that have been sent out, that will be sent out, I believe, as of May 28th, and we will be looking at the responses to those and whether those impact the contingent liabilities in any way in the financial statements. And if they do, we will, that will be reported to you through management.
Okay. Thank you. Any concerns about the net long-term debt increasing to almost $3 billion?
I mean, the net long-term debt is the calculation of financial assets less your liabilities. I think it would be management that should probably speak to what you're comfortable with from a net long-term debt perspective.
Okay. Is there someone at the city who can answer that?
You want me to answer that? So our long-term debt number is consistent with what we've included in our long-range financial plans and reports to council. So we are consistently reporting or issuing debt that's been approved by council.
Yeah, that doesn't answer my question. Is there a concern about the amount of it?
So in the long-range financial plans, we address the affordability of those debt levels, and those are affordable in alignment with what we've included in those long-range financial plans.
Okay. When we take a look at some of our financial assets, I'm assuming that we include in there all our city buildings. Is that true, Ms. Jasmine?
Correct.
Yeah. Previous audit committee reports have indicated that we really don't have a really good handle on our building, many of our infrastructure assets. So how do we calculate that in if we're not sure, like the liability of those assets, the repairs that are required, the actual amount that asset is worth? Does that pose a challenge to you?
So in the financial statements, we report our assets on a cost basis. According to public sector accounting standards, the way we record it is we depreciate from the cost. So it's the initial cost of the building, and then we depreciate it, and buildings are usually approximately 40 years. So we depreciate that amount over 40 years. So the amount that's being shown in the financial statement is the undepreciated amount.
Is the undepreciated amount.
And we show both. We show the total full cost and then the depreciation, accumulated depreciation, and then the undepreciated amount. So you get all three pieces of information related to those assets.
And the cost of refurbishing the assets, is that recorded anywhere?
That is part of our budgeting process. And so when we actually do renewals, our capital budgets each year, we are, and this is one of the comments I made earlier in the presentation, is depreciation is actually much lower than what we actually invest every year. The cost to replace the asset is higher than the depreciation cost. So although in the financial statements we record the depreciation, in our budget we include what we need to replace those assets.
Okay. I guess that's it for me then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I am seeing no other questions. And so thank you very much, Ms. Gignac and Ms. Myers and your team at Ernst & Young for your service again. And thank you, Ms. Jasmine, with your team at Finance. Is the item carried that the Audit Committee recommend Council approve the 2020 City of Ottawa Consolidated Financial Statements? Is that item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. Merci. All right, we are on to item number 4, the Office of the Auditor General report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. We have a presentation from the AG, and Ms. Goujon, proceed when you are ready.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, membres du comité. Carole, si tu peux partager la présentation, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Today, we will be presenting the 2020 Annual Report of Activities of the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. The city's fraud and waste policy identifies the responsibilities of the Auditor General, staff, and managers. Hotlines such as this are best practices for promoting transparency and accountability. As you will see from our presentation, the Fraud and Waste Hotline is well received by both staff and members of the public. The reports received from the Fraud and Waste Hotline have led to investigations and reviews. They are also considered in the office's annual audit planning exercise. These reports discourage those that may be considering unethical, fraudulent, or wasteful activities and prevents future losses. Although not always quantifiable, these reports may save money and have led to the recovery of losses incurred. Most importantly, the hotline also fosters a workplace that encourages and protects those that come forward with a complaint by maintaining their anonymity. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. The city's fraud and waste policy applies to all city employees with the following exceptions: councillors and their office staff. Complaints can be filed to the city's integrity commissioner if someone believes that a contravention of the code of conduct for members of council has occurred. The Integrity Commissioner is responsible to investigate complaints relating to councillors. The Ottawa Police Service. The Office of the Independent Police Review Director receives, manages, and oversees all complaints about police in Ontario through their own hotline. Alternatively, the Ottawa Police Service's Professional Standards section can be contacted. The city's hotline also serves as an intake portal for the Ottawa Public Library. We forward Ottawa Public Library related reports to their senior management for investigations. We do not include the results of these investigations in the city report. Complaints related to the Ottawa Public Health are directed to their senior management for further review. Lastly, the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation has its own hotline called the Integrity Portal. Reporters with matters with regards to the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation are referred to the Integrity Portal. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Here are a few examples of what is considered to be fraud and waste. Fraud can include items such as forgery, misappropriation of assets or funds, also known as theft, as well as fraudulent expense claims. Examples of waste include items such as inefficient processes. This could be photocopying a document that's already available electronically. Unnecessary spending. This could be purchasing an item that isn't required, or, for example, purchasing a vehicle with all the bells and whistles when only a basic model is needed. Foregone revenue. This could be people sneaking onto public transit or into city facilities. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Next, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Auditor General's role. The Office of the Auditor General administers the hotline on behalf of the city. We provide corporate expertise in fraud examination and have a certified fraud examiner in our group. Depending on the year, administration of the hotline and the related reviews and investigations consumes roughly 2 full-time employees. This is roughly 1/4 of our staff complement. We remain impartial and independent throughout the complaint process. Our office is responsible for first receiving the reports, determining whether management or our office is best suited to complete the investigation, review management's corrective actions, consult with the city solicitor, report back to the reporter, And lastly, reporting annually to the Audit Committee and City Council. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Tous les membres du personnel de la ville doivent signaler immédiatement les cas de fraude et d'abus conformément aux modalités de la politique en matière de fraude et d'abus et au code de conduite de la ville d'Ottawa. La direction doit mener des enquêtes sur les signalements transmis par le bureau de la vérificatrice générale, définir les mesures correctives qui s'imposent et finalement en rendre compte à notre bureau. All city staff members are responsible for immediately reporting violations of fraud and waste as outlined in the fraud and waste policy and in accordance with the City of Ottawa's Code of Conduct. Management is responsible for investigating reports that are provided by our office for further inquiry, identifying corrective actions, and subsequently reporting back to our office. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. La ligne directe est conçue pour permettre au personnel et aux résidents d'avoir l'assurance que leur anonymat sera respecté dans toute la mesure du possible et qu'ils pourront compter sur le degré de confidentialité le plus rigoureux en ce qui concerne la question en cause. Pour donner cette assurance, c'est une entreprise indépendante qui reçoit les plaintes sur le portail en ligne ou par téléphone. L'indépendance est aussi assurée par le bureau de la vérificatrice générale qui examine les cas signalés et détermine les prochaines étapes. En outre, le site Web est adapté aux technologies mobiles pour en faciliter l'utilisation. Il est accessible 24 heures sur 24 et 7 jours sur 7. The hotline is designed to provide staff and residents comfort with regards to their anonymity and the strictest level of confidentiality with regards to the matter at hand. This is assured by having an independent company taking receipt of complaints either through the online portal or over the phone. Independence is further strengthened by having the Office of the Auditor General review the cases and determine the next steps. Furthermore, the website is mobile friendly for ease of use and operates 24/7. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. La Ville a conclu avec un nouveau fournisseur de services un contrat pour la solution de prise en charge des signalements sur le web et par téléphone. La conversion complète avec le nouveau fournisseur s'est déroulée en février 2021. On peut soumettre les cas à la ligne directe de fraude et d'abus en appelant au même numéro de téléphone et en tapant la même adresse URL. Même si ceux et celles qui font des signalements peuvent constater de légères différences dans l'aspect et le mode d'utilisation de la solution de prise en charge sur le web, le service est toujours confidentiel, anonyme et indépendant. The city entered into a new contract for the web and phone intake solution with a new service provider. Full conversion to the new service provider occurred in February of this year. Cases can be submitted to the Fraud and Waste Hotline using the same phone number and the same URL. While reporters may find a slight difference in the look and feel of the web intake solution, the service continues to be confidential, anonymous, and independent. I'd like to now pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Ed Miner to discuss the results of this past year.
Thank you, Natalie. Next slide, please. So the Fraud and Waste Hotline received 204 reports in 2020. This compared with 224 in 2019, 194 in 2018, and 193 in 2017. So you can see there was a 9% decrease from the number we received the year before in 2019, but really it's in line with the average for the past few years. Next slide, please. As far as who submitted the reports in 2020, 90 reports were submitted by members of the public and 114 were submitted by city employees. This ratio, again, is roughly similar to what we found in 2019. Note that in 2020, management reported 3 of the 114 reports submitted by employees, as is required under the fraud and waste policy. Next slide, please. You can see that in 2020, we closed 189 reports, and that as of December 31st, 2020, there were 54 reports and investigations still in progress. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the 189 reports that we closed last year. Now, substantiated allegations are those that were found to be accurate and constituted fraud or waste. And there were 27 such cases in 2020. That is 33% of the reports that we investigated last year, that were investigated last year. I should remind the committee that when reports are found to be substantiated, the decision to take any disciplinary action is taken by management and is not the OHE's area. The next category is accurate but compliant. And these are allegations that are found to be accurate, but do not constitute fraud or waste. For example, this might be a reporter who accurately identifies a city employee taking a vehicle home at night. But what the reporter doesn't know is that the employee is on call and may have been proved to have the vehicle at home so they can respond quickly to emergencies. There were 33 such incidents in 2020, and this is roughly in line with the prior year. 21 cases were found to be inaccurate in 2021, and again, this is roughly in line with prior years. Now, we had 61 reports that were not applicable, meaning that the allegations were not applicable to the city's fraud and waste policy. These can be cases where the city's services were not under the fraud and waste policy's jurisdiction, such as counselors and their staff, Ottawa Police Service, or Ottawa Community Housing. And then there were also cases that did not relate to city services at all, such as reports from residents about credit card fraud or soliciting and things like that. And lastly, we closed 47 reports where there was insufficient information. And in these cases, even when we got back to the reporter to ask for more information, the allegation was unclear and could not be investigated. Next slide, please. The 27 substantiated cases relate to the following categories. There were 9 cases of theft, embezzlement, or fraud. This year, that included a case of vacation leave not being submitted. There were 8 cases of violation of laws, regulations, policies, or procedures. This year, that included employees washing their personal vehicles on city property during overtime hours. There was 1 case related to health and safety or the environment, and this related to an employee pasting on their personal social media page that the city employees should make holes in their face mask. There were 3 cases of unauthorized use or misuse of city property or time. This year, that included an employee doing personal shopping using a city vehicle during work hours. And there were 4 cases related to social assistance. Further details on these 25 cases are provided in our full report. In addition to these, there were 2 cases that we were presented to Audit Committee in October 2020 in the form of investigation reports. And these 2 cases are posted on the OAG's website. Next slide, please. In conclusion, hotlines really are a best practice for organizations. And we believe that a significant value of the Fraud and Waste Hotline is that it continues to contribute positively to the ethical culture here at the city. Next slide, please. So on behalf of the Auditor General and myself, I'd like to express our appreciation for the continued cooperation and assistance afforded to us by the City Manager, City staff, and management. And of course, I personally want to thank the OAG team for their continued efforts in this area. This is the end of our presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Auditor General. Merci, Madame Goujon. Vice Chair Meehan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to staff for that. I think we should be gratified that we do have the Fraud and Waste Hotline, and it is being actively used. I'm just wondering, I guess the question I have is my concern with the Auditor General said this requires 2 full-time employees. I'm wondering, does that put pressure on the office and are any of the other audits affected, like other potential audits not being followed through or not being conducted because we have the staff dedicated to the Fraud and Waste Hotline?
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, Throughout the year, our annual plan really does allocate resources based off of what we estimate we're going to need. This has been, at least my understanding is, it's consistently required roughly 2 full-time employees. So we schedule accordingly. We always ensure that we have flexibility throughout the year as to where we direct our staff. It's also a benefit of having our consulting budget, our professional services budget, where if for some reason at one point throughout the year, we have a higher level of reports coming through, we may direct some of our audit work to our consultants as part of our standing offer to help us get through the work. But it's my understanding that the team has not had any issues in the past in order to complete the audits required.
Okay. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the auditor and her team. In your report, Madam Auditor, on slide number 4, the summary of reports by categories, we've seen quite a bit of reduction in many of the areas. Is it because of COVID-19 and people not attending workplace in person, or really this is a good sign moving forward? I mean, how would you explain that slide in your report?
Thank you for your question, Councillor.
Carol, are you able to put up slide 4?
It's not a slide, Mr. Chair. That's in the report itself.
I apologize. I apologize.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Chair, I don't think I'd want to speculate with regards to the results of this past year. Usually we try to review whether there's a trend that's occurring or not. So 1 year of results really is difficult for us to determine whether or not there's any consistent changes that are going to occur. I think I'd like to wait and see what we see coming forward this year, and perhaps maybe we could get back to that question next year.
And is any recommendation from you and with your experience, so instead of wasting your time, and when we see, or when you receive a call, somebody's taking a vehicle at home, is there should be some from management or from city staff to identify prior, so you don't get that call? Should they notify you first by saying, well, Eli's going to take a City of Ottawa vehicle home for whatever reason? Is there a way we can, because I can see people get, a little bit when they see a City of Ottawa vehicle in the individual neighborhoods, and so they call, why this vehicle park here all day or all night, not knowing those people could be on call, whether water service or road safety or many reasons. Some of our staff, if there's a way to be proactive. So when you get this call, just like a fire permits, we give permits, people call us ahead of time. So when we receive a call about a fire on that location, we say, well, yes, they have a permit to have a fire. Is there a way we can do advanced process? I hope you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Chair, yes, I do fully understand your question. I guess I'd just like to highlight a couple points. First and foremost, having the hotline and having individuals come to us as a first point of contact really does help keep that anonymity. So I think that's the first piece we want to highlight. If they were to have a direct mechanism to management in some cases, they would no longer necessarily have that, especially if we're speaking about staff internally. I think that's the first point we want to take into consideration. I'd also like to highlight how many particular reports that we receive on a year. And I think we've averaged anywhere from around 200 to 300 over the course of the past 5 years. If you think about how many employees we have roughly 17,000 employees. So if we had a mechanism for reporting all exceptions regarding each particular employee, for example, that they're allowed to use a vehicle and take their vehicle home, I think that would be a much heavier burden on management. So I think we do have what is likely the most efficient process. I believe we still want to continue, especially from an internal perspective, encouraging staff that do feel comfortable if it's something that they're observing in the workplace to first go to their supervisor. That's obviously, the best recommended course of action. It's the most efficient one. That being said, our service is there for individuals that don't necessarily feel comfortable going forward to their supervisor. And I think it brings excellent value to the city.
Well, in the police ward, we used to have those vehicles put a sign on it, say on-call vehicle. So that vehicle, it is on call, and not necessarily could be a police vehicle, but could be even civilian vehicle. And those city trucks can there's a way we can, or certain vehicle we can put is on call. I'm trying to save efficiency and save some times from calling the fraud line and the fraud line investigate. And then I'm just looking for a way for cost efficiency with this practice. That's what, because a lot of staff on calls do it during any other occasion. So,
Chair, I believe that question would best be directed to management. I'm not sure if the city manager would like to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Gaujon. Yeah, Councillor, I understand what you're getting at, but I don't think it's that direct. I think when people call, sometimes it might be the day after, it might be after a couple of days. The schedules change all the time. You know, if you look at who takes vehicles home, for instance, you know, it could be replaced. We'd be in a administration of notifying the Auditor General of who has vehicles, and that, I think that'd be more cumbersome. So I agree with Natalie's initial comments that it's easier if we just receive the complaint and then check it out. It's not that hard to check it out. To be proactive, I get what you're getting at, like what you're trying to do, but I think that will create more work than just allowing the call to come in, considering it's 200-300 complaints a year.
okay, noted. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Mr. Kanalakis and Ms. Gaujon.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other question? Yes, who has just raised their hand?
Councillor
Kavanaugh.
Councillor Kavanaugh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My internet went out and in, but I think I got most things. I just had a question in regards to employees that were reporting to two different managers, and that was a problem. And pardon me if I missed it and somebody asked that question, but I just wanted to know what corrective action was taken, because it sounded like when you have two managers to report to, there was obviously confusion. And I don't know if this is a common issue or this was an anomaly in terms of the reporting of vacation time or not. So maybe it's a question for the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this was an unusual situation where it's a case of miscommunication, and unfortunately, the employee that was the subject of this complaint took advantage of that situation. And I think that, from what I understand from reviewing the actual investigation review report, that's been noted and cleaned up. I don't think that happens very often where you see this. I think it is an anomaly where you see one employee reporting to two managers. There was a specific reason that happened, and unfortunately, the employee took advantage of it, and they got caught, and it was dealt with, and there were corrective actions taken within management to ensure that that doesn't happen again.
Councillor Kavanaugh, are you satisfied, or you appear to have frozen, Councillor Kavanaugh? I don't know if others, yes. Okay, I guess she'll log back in and hopefully she heard the city manager's question. There's no others. Further to Madame Gaujon, further to Councillor El Shantiri, I noted a new supplier for intake, and if there hopefully that platform, that web intake platform from that new supplier has some flexibility in it, and maybe some of the suggestions whereby there can be contextual information provided to persons who are reporting fraud and waste that can be incorporated in that platform. That would be great, and I hope that that new platform provides your office with a more streamlined reporting of fraud and waste issues that are of concern to residents and to employees of the city. so that corrective action can be taken quickly. I noticed on the last slide from Mr. Myers, I'm sorry, Mr. Minor, I see Councillor Kavanaugh is back. Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
let me go
Sorry
back
about
to
that.
you. No
Internet
problem.
issues.
I understand. Were you satisfied with the city manager's?
Maybe I can take it offline with them because I missed a good chunk of it. I'm
I
sorry.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Did you have any other questions other than that one?
No, not at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Back to my question to Mr. Minor. The last slides talked about the level of awareness, and Madame Goujon, new to your role as Auditor General, are you satisfied with the level of awareness? How would you or Mr. Minor see increasing the awareness of the fraud and waste hotline with respect to employees and their comfort of the anonymity of reporting, and with respect to its the residents of the city of Ottawa with their knowledge of the fraud and waste hotline and how they can report?
Thank you very much for your question, Chair. I'd like to firstly highlight that awareness of the hotline is a shared responsibility between my office as well as the city manager's office. I actually just had a conversation last week with the city manager with regards to looking at how we go about looking at some potential changes and how we'd like to raise awareness. So we are just right at the on stage of that. So I wouldn't necessarily want to get into any details, but I'm hopeful that within the next year we'll come back with a few suggestions to committee.
Excellent. Thank you. Perhaps we'll see that in your work plan for 2022 or. Wonderful. I am seeing no other questions, and so the recommendation is that the Audit Committee recommend Council receive the report on the fraud and waste hotline. Is that item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Those were the 4 agenda items for today. I am seeing no in-camera items. Any notices of motion for subsequent meetings of the Audit Committee? Seeing none. Any inquiries? Seeing none. Any other business? I'll remind everyone that the Auditor General and I will have immediate availability following today's Audit Committee meeting, and let's schedule that for 10:45 at 10:45 today. And now a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
So moved. Carried.
Carried.
So carried. The next meeting, the date is to be determined. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for your participation today. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Merci Carole.